Colonel Marcus Rivera stood in the cramped transport ship, watching 20,000 human soldiers prepare for what their alien masters called a mission. He knew better. This was an execution. The Valtharan Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years. Their purple-skinned warriors were tall, strong, and proud. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. Earth had fallen to them just 5 years ago, and now they owned humanity. Rivera looked at his soldiers. Young men and women from Earth, most barely out of their teens. They wore cheap armor and carried old weapons. The Valtharans had given them just enough equipment to fight, but not enough to survive. "Sir, we're getting close to the target," said Sergeant Maria Santos, his communications officer. She was 23, had a degree in engineering, and should have been building bridges instead of preparing to die on some alien world through the small windows. Rivera could see their destination. Kepler 442b was a mining planet, rich in rare metals the Empire needed. It had been a peaceful world until 3 weeks ago. That was when the Kethmori swarm arrived. The swarm was the Empire's worst nightmare. They were bug-like creatures that moved in perfect coordination. They ate everything in their path and left nothing behind but dead worlds. Every species that had fought them had been completely destroyed. "Listen up," Rivera called to his troops. The transport ship fell quiet. "You all know what we're facing down there. The Empire's best soldiers couldn't stop these things. They're sending us because they think we're expendable." He paused, looking at the young faces around him. "They're wrong. We're not expendable. We're human. And humans don't give up." The ship shuddered as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the windows, they could see the surface below. What had once been green forests and blue lakes was now covered in a gray, web-like substance. The swarm had been busy. 30 seconds to landing. The pilot called out. Rivera checked his rifle one more time. It was an old model, at least 10 years behind Valtharan military standards. The armor was thin, and the communication equipment barely worked. But it would have to do. The transport touched down with a heavy thud. The doors opened, and hot, humid air rushed in. It smelled wrong, like rotting meat and burning plastic. "Move out," Rivera shouted. The humans poured out of the transports. All around them, 12 more ships were landing, each carrying about 1,500 soldiers. The landing zone was a flat area that had once been a Valtharan mining facility. Now it was mostly ruins. Private James Chun, a young soldier from California, was one of the first to notice movement in the distance. "Contact. Something's moving in those buildings." Rivera raised his binoculars. Through the gray webbing that covered everything, he could see shapes moving. They were roughly the size of a large dog, but moved wrong. Too fast, too smooth, like they were flowing instead of running. "Defensive positions." Rivera ordered. The swarm creatures came in a wave. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They looked like a cross between a spider and a beetle, with hard black shells and too many legs. But it was their coordination that was truly terrifying. They moved as one, like fingers on a hand. The first attack hit the eastern perimeter. Lieutenant Sarah Kim's platoon opened fire with everything they had. The old human weapons weren't very powerful, but they worked. Several creatures went down, their shells cracking under the impact. But for everyone they killed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "They're not stopping," Kim shouted into her radio. "We need support over here." Rivera was already moving. He grabbed 2 squads of reserves and ran toward the eastern line. As they ran, he noticed something strange. The creatures weren't just attacking randomly. They were testing the human defenses, probing for weak spots. The battle went on for 3 hours. By the end, the humans had lost almost 400 soldiers, but they had held the line. The swarm had pulled back. Disappearing into the gray webbing that covered the landscape. As night fell, Rivera walked among his soldiers. They were tired, scared, and angry. Many of them were treating wounded friends. The medical supplies were already running low. "How long are we supposed to hold this place?" asked Sergeant Tom Williams, a career soldier who had fought in Earth's last wars before the conquest. 72 hours, Rivera replied. "That's what they told us." Williams laughed, but there was no humor in it. 72 hours. They really do want us all dead. That night, Rivera couldn't sleep. He sat in the command post, studying reports from the perimeter guards. The swarm hadn't attacked again, but they were still out there. He could hear them moving in the darkness, making strange clicking sounds. Captain Elena Rodriguez, his intelligence officer, brought him a cup of coffee. It was terrible, made from recycled water and synthetic beans, but it was hot. "Sir, I've been analyzing the attack patterns," she said. "There's something odd about them." "What do you mean?" "They fought like they were following a script. Every move was coordinated, but it was also predictable. Like they were running a program." Rivera nodded. He had noticed the same thing. "What do you think it means?" "I think they've never fought humans before. They were using tactics that work against other species, but maybe not against us." Rivera thought about this as he watched the sunrise through the small window. In the distance, he could see more swarm creatures moving through the ruins. They were getting ready for another attack, but so were the humans. During the night, several squads had rigged explosives around the perimeter. Others had found better positions in the rubble. They were learning. As the second day began, Rivera felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. The Empire had sent them here to die, and they probably would. But maybe, just maybe, they could make it cost the swarm more than anyone expected. The real test was about to begin. Asterisk. The second wave came at dawn, just as Captain Rodriguez had predicted. But this time, the humans were ready. Sergeant Chan had spent the night working with the engineering team. They had discovered something interesting about the abandoned mining equipment scattered around the facility. The industrial lasers used for cutting through rock were still functional. "Fire!" Chun shouted. The mining laser beam cut through the morning air and sliced into the advancing swarm creatures. The intense heat didn't just kill them, it vaporized them completely. The coordinated charge suddenly had a gap in it. The swarm creatures paused. For just a moment, their perfect coordination faltered. It was like watching a computer program crash. Private Amy Okafor, an engineering student from Nigeria, had also been busy during the night. She had rigged the ore processing facility to work as a giant trap. When the swarm creatures ran over the hidden pressure plates, tons of processed metal ore fell from the storage towers above. The creatures were fast, but they couldn't outrun gravity. But what surprised Rivera the most was how his soldiers refused to leave anyone behind. When the swarm overran Delta Company's position, Alpha Company immediately moved to help them. Traditional military logic said they should retreat and maintain the defensive line. The humans ignored military logic. "We don't leave people behind," Sergeant Williams said when Rivera questioned the decision. "That's not how humans work." The rescue cost them 12 soldiers, but they saved 32 members of Delta Company, including their medic. By all military calculations, it was a bad trade. But something strange happened afterward. The other companies fought harder, knowing their friends would come for them if they got in trouble. Lieutenant Armstrong led the Marines on the south perimeter. He had noticed something about the swarm creatures' movement patterns. They always moved in groups of 9 or 12. They always approached from the same angles, and they always retreated when they lost more than 30% of their numbers. "They're not thinking," Armstrong told his Marines. "They're following rules. And if something follows rules, you can predict what it's going to do." Armstrong started setting traps based on these predictions. When the creatures approached from their usual angle, they found caltrops made from mining equipment blocking their path. When they tried their standard flanking maneuver, they ran into concentrated fire from hidden positions. The swarm adapted, but slowly. The humans adapted faster. Dr. Sarah Kim was not a soldier. She was a xenobiologist who had been conscripted because the Empire needed someone who understood alien life forms. She had been studying the dead swarm creatures, and what she found was fascinating. They're all connected, she explained to Rivara during a brief break in the fighting. Look at this neural tissue. It's designed to receive and transmit signals constantly. They're not individual creatures. They're like fingers on a hand. So what's the brain? Rivera asked. Somewhere else. Maybe in orbit, maybe underground. But here's the interesting part. I think the connection can be disrupted. Kim had been experimenting with the communication equipment. The old human radios operated on frequencies that seemed to interfere with the swarm's coordination. When she cranked up the power and broadcast white noise, nearby creatures became confused and disoriented. The breakthrough came on the second night. Corporal Lisa Jiang, a former computer programmer, was working on the radio equipment when she accidentally created a feedback loop. The high-pitched screech that came out of the speakers was painful to human ears, but it did something else too. Every swarm creature within 100 meters stopped moving. They just stood there, twitching. Do that again, Rivara ordered. Jiang repeated the process. Again, the creatures froze. They stayed that way for almost 5 minutes before the effect wore off. We can jam them, Kim said excitedly. We can break their connection to the hive mind. But the humans were learning other things too. They learned that swarm creatures always attack the strongest fortified position first, leaving weaker areas alone. So they made their weakest positions look strong and their strong positions look weak. They learned that the creatures had trouble with irregular terrain. So they used explosives to create obstacles and channels that forced the swarm to move where the humans wanted them to go. Most importantly, they learned that while other species would panic and break under pressure, humans got angry instead. When the swarm bioweapons hit Bravo Company on the second day, half the unit went down with burns from the acidic spray. A Valtheran unit would have retreated. The humans charged. You want to play with acid? Sergeant Martinez yelled as he led the charge. We got acid too. Martinez's squad had found the mining facility's chemical storage. They filled their old water bottles with industrial solvent and started throwing them at the creatures. The improvised weapons weren't as effective as the swarm's bioweapons, but they worked. The swarm seemed confused by this response. Their tactics were based on causing fear and retreat. They didn't know what to do when their targets got angry and attacked back even harder. By the end of the second day, something impossible was happening. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning ground. They had pushed the swarm back almost 2 kilometers from their original positions. Rivara stood on top of a damaged mining tower, looking out over the battlefield. The gray webbing that covered everything was being cleared away by his soldiers. They had figured out that regular fire could burn it off, so they were systematically removing the swarm's cover. Sir, Rodriguez approached with a communication device. We're getting signals from orbit. It's the Valtheran fleet. Rivera took the communicator. The voice on the other end spoke in accented English with the characteristic arrogance of the Imperial military. Human forces. This is Admiral Thexfer of the Imperial fleet. Report your status. We're holding our positions, Rivera replied. Enemy forces are being pushed back. There was a long pause. Repeat that. Did you say you are pushing back the swarm? That's correct. We have the situation under control. Another pause. That's not possible. Maintain your positions. Do not attempt any offensive operations. Imperial reinforcements are being considered. Rivera smiled grimly. The Vailthorans hadn't sent reinforcements because they expected all the humans to be dead by now. They were probably scrambling to figure out what had gone wrong with their plan. Understood, Rivera said. But he had no intention of just maintaining position. As the third day began, Rivera gave new orders to his commanders. They weren't going to wait for the swarm to attack again. They were going to take the fight to the enemy. The humans had learned something the Valthoran Empire had forgotten in 3,000 years of easy victories. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And sometimes being expendable means you have nothing left to lose. The real war was about to begin. The 72-hour deadline had passed 6 hours ago. Rivera's forces were not only alive, they were winning. Dr. Sarah Kim made the discovery that changed everything while studying a captured swarm creature in the makeshift laboratory she had set up in the mining facility's old office building. The creature was still alive, but separated from the others, and its behavior was completely different from what they had observed on the battlefield. "It's lost," Kim told Rivera as they watched the creature through the reinforced glass. "Look at how it's moving." The creature was wandering in circles, bumping into walls, apparently unable to make any coherent decisions. It was like watching someone who had suddenly gone blind and deaf trying to navigate a room. "The hive mind can't handle individual units," Kim continued. "When they're disconnected from the group consciousness, they literally don't know how to function." But Kim had found something even more interesting. She had been testing the creature's responses to different stimuli. Loud noises, bright lights, various scents, all of these caused predictable reactions. But when she did something completely random, like playing music or showing it pictures of earth animals, the creature became completely paralyzed. "It's the unpredictability," Kim explained to the gathered officers. "The hive mind is like a giant computer. It can process massive amounts of information and coordinate millions of units, but only if it can predict what's going to happen next. Random actions cause it to freeze up while it tries to calculate responses." Captain Armstrong immediately saw the implications. "So if we do things that don't make military sense, we break their ability to coordinate," Kim finished. "They can't plan counters to strategies that don't follow logical patterns." Rivera felt a grin spreading across his face. Military academies throughout the galaxy taught logical, predictable strategies. The Vailthorans had been using the same tactical manual for centuries. But humans had always been different. Humans had intuition, gut feelings, and a tendency to do stupid things that somehow worked. The new strategy was implemented immediately. Instead of establishing regular patrol patterns, human squads moved randomly. Instead of fortifying the most defensible positions, they fortified positions that made no strategic sense. Instead of attacking at dawn or dusk like any rational military force would, they attacked at completely random times. Sergeant Chun's squad attacked the swarm, position at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon. For no reason other than Chun had a feeling it was the right time. The creatures were completely unprepared. They had been positioned to defend against logical assault times, not random ones. Private O'Caffer's engineering team started building defenses that violated every rule of military engineering. Walls that had gaps in them for no apparent reason. Gun positions that faced the wrong direction. Supply depots placed in locations that made resupplying nearly impossible. The swarm couldn't figure out what the humans were protecting, or where the real defenses were. Their scouting units spent hours analyzing human positions that turned out to be decoys, while the real defensive points remained hidden. But it was Lieutenant Park's innovation that really broke the swarm's coordination. Park had been a music teacher before the war, and she started using sound as a weapon in ways no military manual had ever described. She had her soldiers play music during attacks. Not martial music or coordinated drums, but random songs from Earth. Pop music, classical, jazz, rock, all mixed together in a chaotic symphony that drove the swarm's collective consciousness into computational overload. They can't process it, Park explained as her squad advanced behind a boombox, playing an eclectic mix of Beethoven and heavy metal. The hive mind is trying to analyze the sound for tactical information, but music doesn't contain tactical information. It just exists. The effect was devastating. Swarm units that encountered Park's musical attacks would stop advancing and start moving in confused circles. Unable to coordinate their response, word of the human success spread through Imperial communication networks. Admiral Lexver's reports back to the Empire grew increasingly frantic. The humans are not following established military doctrine, he reported to Imperial Command. They are attacking in patterns that make no logical sense. Their defensive positions violate basic strategic principles. And somehow, it's working. The response from Imperial Command was predictable. Impossible. Inferior species cannot defeat the swarm. Your reports must be in error. But the evidence was undeniable. Orbital surveillance showed the gray webbing that marked swarm territory retreating steadily. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable were being pushed back by a force of humans with outdated equipment and no formal military training. Captain Rodriguez had been monitoring Imperial communications, and what she heard worried her. The Empire was trying to figure out how to take credit for the human success. Worse, they were already making plans to study human tactics and apply them to their own forces. They're going to try to replace us, she told Rivera. Once they figure out how we're doing this, they won't need us anymore. Rivera nodded. He had expected this. The Empire had sent humans to die, but when humans survived and won instead, they would want to control that victory. The final test of human unpredictability came when the swarm launched what appeared to be a massive counterattack. Thousands of creatures emerged from underground tunnels and advanced in perfect formation toward the human positions any rational military commander would have called for retreat or requested immediate reinforcement. Rivera did neither. Instead, he ordered every human unit to do whatever they felt like doing. No coordination, he broadcast on all frequencies. No formation. No plan. Every squad does whatever seems right to them. Trust your instincts. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations. The human forces scattered in apparently random directions. Some squads directly at the swarm formations. Others retreated to high ground. Still others moved to flanking positions that made no tactical sense. The swarm's hive mind, trying to coordinate responses to dozens of different, illogical human actions, crashed. For the first time in anyone's memory, swarm creatures began fighting each other as conflicting orders reached different units. The perfect formation collapsed into chaos. Thousands of creatures milled around aimlessly, while confused neural signals created feedback loops in the collective consciousness. The humans, acting on pure instinct and adrenaline, tore through the disorganized swarm forces like a chainsaw through paper. When the dust settled, the swarm had been completely rooted. Not just defeated, rooted. The surviving creatures were fleeing the planet entirely. Their coordination so damaged they could barely function as individual units. Rivera stood on the highest point of the mining facility, watching swarm bioships lifting off in the distance. They were abandoning Kepler 442b completely. Sir, Sergeant Santos approached with a communication from the Imperial fleet. Admiral Lexver wants to speak with you immediately. Rivera took the communicator, but he wasn't looking forward to this conversation. The Empire had sent them here to die, and now they would want explanations for why the humans had lived instead. More importantly, they would want to ensure that human success never happened again. without Imperial control. The voice that came through the communicator was different from before. Where Admiral Dexver had been condescending earlier, now he sounded almost afraid. Colonel Rivara, Imperial Command requires a full tactical report immediately. How did you achieve victory against the swarm? Rivera looked out over his soldiers. They were celebrating, sharing rations, and tending to their wounded. They had done the impossible because no one had told them it was impossible. We got creative, Rivara said simply. He turned off the communicator before the Admiral could respond. There would be time for politics later. Right now, he had to prepare his people for the next phase of this war. Because one thing was certain. The Empire would never let humans be this independent again. 3 weeks later, General Rivara, he had been promoted by necessity, rather than imperial decree, stood in what had once been a swarm breeding facility on the moon of Kepler 442c. His forces had not only defended the mining world, they had gone on the offensive and cleared 3 entire star systems. The transformation was remarkable. The gray webbing that had covered everything was being systematically removed. Human engineering teams had figured out how to reverse the swarm's terraforming process. And green plants from Earth were already growing in the clean soil. But it was what the humans had built that truly amazed the Velthoran. Observers who had finally arrived to investigate. This is unprecedented, Dr. Veltar, a Velthoran scientist, told Rivera as they toured the facility. You've integrated swarm biotechnology with your own equipment. This should be impossible. Rivera smiled. Dr. Kim and her team had indeed done the impossible. They had captured enough swarm creatures to understand their biological systems, then found ways to use those systems for human purposes. The acid-spitting organs became chemical weapons. The biometal shells became armor. The neural communication networks became long-range communication systems. Humans adapt, Rivera said simply. It's what we do. What he didn't tell the Velthoran was that the humans had also learned to think like the swarm when they needed to. Not with a hive mind, but with small unit coordination that could predict swarm movements hours before they happened. Sergeant Chun had become an expert at this. His squad could read the patterns in swarm movements like a language, knowing exactly when and where the next attack would come. They had prevented 6 major swarm offensives just by being in the right place at the right time. It's like playing chess against someone who only knows 5 moves, Chun explained to newer arrivals. Once you learn the moves, you can beat them every time. But the real revolution was happening among the human forces themselves. What had started as a desperate holding action had become something much larger. Word of the human victories had spread to other human colonies throughout the Empire, and volunteers were arriving daily. Captain Rodriguez, now a major, was in charge of training the new recruits. They came from mining worlds, agricultural colonies, and manufacturing centers across human space. They had one thing in common. They were tired of being expendable. The Empire tells us we're inferior, Rodriguez told a group of new arrivals from the industrial world of Titan 7. They tell us we're only good for dangerous jobs and suicide missions. But look around you. We've done what their best soldiers couldn't do. We've beaten the swarm. The new soldiers were different from the original conscripts. They weren't here because they had been forced to come. They were here because they believed in what the human forces were doing. Private Jackson, a former factory worker, summed up the feeling perfectly. I spent 10 years making weapons for Velthoran soldiers who looked down on me like I was dirt. Now I get to use those weapons to protect human worlds. This feels right. But success brought new problems. Imperial Command had finally acknowledged the human victories, but they wanted control. Admiral Dexver had been replaced by General Kexvalum, a veteran of dozens of campaigns who was known for bringing rebellious species back into line. You have done well, General Kexvolume told Rivera during their first meeting. But this campaign has grown beyond what was originally intended. Imperial Command is taking direct control of all anti-swarm operations. Rivera had expected this. He had also prepared for it. With respect, General, my forces are specifically adapted to fight the swarm. Imperial doctrine doesn't work against them. We've proven that. Your methods will be studied and incorporated into Imperial training. Your forces will be reorganized under proper Imperial command structure. And if we refuse, Kexvol's purple features darkened. Then you will be classified as rebels and dealt with accordingly. Rivera nodded politely, but he had already made his decision. That night, he called a meeting of all human commanders. They want to break us up, he told the assembled officers. Spread our people across Imperial units where we can be controlled. They want our tactics, but not our independence. What do you recommend, sir? Asked Major Armstrong. Rivera looked around the room. These men and women had proven themselves in ways the Empire refused to acknowledge. They had saved worlds, protected civilians, and turned the tide of a war the Empire was losing. They deserve better than being used as expendable assets. We declare independence, Rivera said quietly. We form our own military organization, the Terra Liberation Front. The room was silent for a moment. Then Major Kim spoke up. The Empire won't accept that. They'll send forces against us. Let them, Rivera replied. We've beaten the swarm. We can handle Imperial forces too. The decision was unanimous. The next morning, Rivera sent a message to General Kexvolume. Human forces are withdrawing from Imperial command structure. We will continue to fight the swarm, but as an independent military organization. Any Imperial forces that attempt to interfere will be treated as hostile. Kexvol's response was immediate and predictable. You are in rebellion against the Empire. Surrender immediately or face the consequences. Rivera's response was equally direct. Come and take us. The first test came 3 days later. An Imperial fleet arrived at Kepler 442b, expecting to find scattered human forces ready to surrender. Instead, they found a fully operational military base protected by energy shields that shouldn't have existed. How did they build this? General Kexvolume demanded of his tactical officer. They've integrated swarm biotechnology with human engineering, sir. The defensive systems are unlike anything in our databases. The Imperial forces tried a standard orbital bombardment, but the shields held. They tried landing assault troops, but the humans had learned too well from fighting the swarm. Every landing attempt was predicted and countered. Most frustrating of all, the humans were using the Empire's own tactics against them. Imperial military doctrine was logical, predictable, and designed to work against other conventional forces. The humans had studied it for years while serving under Imperial command. They know exactly what we're going to do before we do it, the tactical officer reported after the third failed assault. Meanwhile, the swarm was adapting to human tactics, but in doing so, they were becoming more predictable to human analysis. The hive mind had started developing new strategies specifically designed to counter human unpredictability. But this focus made the swarm easier for humans to understand. Dr. Kim had established a pattern recognition center that could predict major swarm movements days in advance. They're trying so hard to counter our randomness that they've become systematic, she explained to Rivera. It's like they're following a manual called How to Fight Humans. This gave the human forces a strategic advantage they had never expected. They could fight defensive actions against the swarm while simultaneously planning offensive operations against Imperial forces. The war was evolving in ways no one had anticipated. What had begun as a simple mission to delay the swarm had become a three-way conflict. The Empire wanted control, the swarm wanted to survive and adapt, and the humans wanted freedom. Rivera stood on the observation deck of the captured swarm facility. looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, both Imperial and Swarm fleets were planning their next moves. But the humans had advantages neither enemy fully understood. They had proven they could outthink the Swarm and outfight the Empire. Now they had to prove they could build something better than either. The message that arrived that evening confirmed what Rivera had been expecting. The Swarm was massing forces for a massive assault on the Empire's core worlds. Imperial intelligence estimated that without human assistance, the Empire's home system would fall within months. General Kexvol's message was brief and desperate. Request immediate human assistance. The Empire is prepared to negotiate terms. Rivera smiled as he read the message. The Empire that had sent humans to die was now begging humans to save them, that it was time to discuss terms. The Swarm's final assault on the Empire's core worlds began exactly as Dr. Kim had predicted. Millions of bioships emerged from deep space, moving in the perfect coordination that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. The Imperial fleet, following traditional defensive doctrine, moved to intercept them in the standard battle. Formations that had worked for 3,000 years. The Valtheran forces were slaughtered. General Rivera watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the captured swarm ship that now served as his flagship. The vessel had been completely redesigned by human engineers, combining alien biotechnology with human innovation in ways that horrified traditional military minds. Imperial losses are at 60% and climbing, reported Major Rodriguez from her station. Their formations are being systematically destroyed. Rivera nodded. He had warned General Kexvolum that traditional tactics wouldn't work, but the Empire's military leadership had ignored him. Pride was more important to them than survival. Sir, Major Kim approached with a communication device. General Kexvolum is requesting immediate assistance. He's prepared to accept our terms. All of them? Complete independence for all human colonies, territorial rights to any systems we clear of swarm forces, and recognition of the Terra Liberation Front as a sovereign military power. Rivera considered this. 6 months ago, he had been a colonial officer in an alien empire, commanding troops with outdated equipment on a suicide mission. Now the Empire was offering him everything he had never dared to ask for. Tell him we accept, Rivera said. But we do this our way. The human fleet that arrived at the Imperial home system bore no resemblance to the ragtag force that had been sent to die on Kepler 442b, 50 ships strong. Each one a hybrid of human engineering and adapted swarm biotechnology. They moved through space in patterns that defied traditional naval doctrine. Instead of maintaining formation, human ships spread out randomly across the battlefield. Instead of coordinating their attacks, each ship acted independently, striking at targets of opportunity. Instead of following any recognizable tactical plan, they did whatever seemed right in the moment. The effect on the swarm was immediate and devastating. Bioships that had been systematically destroying Imperial forces suddenly found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't predict or counter. Human vessels appeared where they shouldn't be, attacked targets that made no strategic sense, and disappeared before the swarm could coordinate a response. Captain Zhang, commanding the converted frigate Earth's Defiance, exemplified the new human approach to space warfare. Her ship had been a mining vessel before the war, but human engineers had equipped it with weapons that combined plasma cannons with swarm bioacids. Target that cluster of bioships near the third moon, she ordered her gunner. Sergeant Chun, no particular reason. I just don't like the way they're positioned. The attack destroyed 12 swarm vessels and disrupted the coordination of hundreds more. The hive mind, trying to process this seemingly random action, failed to notice Zhang's ship moving to attack a much more valuable target. But it was Lieutenant Park's innovation that truly broke the swarm's coordination. She had equipped her ship with the most powerful sound system ever built, capable of broadcasting human music across entire solar systems. Broadcasting Earth Symphony No. 7, Park announced as her ship dove into the middle of the largest swarm formation. The combination of classical music and death metal that poured from her speakers caused visible confusion among the bioships. Swarm vessels began firing on each other as conflicting neural signals created chaos in their collective consciousness. The perfect formations that had terrorized the galaxy dissolved into random clusters of confused creatures. General Kex Volume, watching from his damaged flagship, could barely comprehend what he was seeing. How are they doing this? Their tactics violate every principle of space warfare. That's exactly why they work, Admiral Dexfer replied. He had been studying human methods for months and was beginning to understand them. The swarm can counter logical tactics because logic is predictable. But humans don't always use logic. The breakthrough came when Major Armstrong's ship discovered something remarkable. While scanning a disabled swarm bioship, they detected multiple competing signals from different parts of the hive mind. The focus on countering human tactics had created fractures in the collective consciousness. It's splitting apart. Dr. Kim reported from the science vessel Darwin's Revenge. The hive mind is developing multiple personalities as it tries to process human unpredictability. Different sections are giving contradictory orders. Rivera immediately saw the opportunity. All ships implement Operation Chaos Theory. Every unit does something completely different. Maximum randomness. What followed was the most unconventional space battle in galactic history. Human ships scattered across the system, each one operating independently. Some ships played music while they fought. Others attacked in mathematical patterns that meant nothing to military tactics but confused the swarm's pattern recognition. Systems. Captain Jackson's ship performed barrel rolls while firing at random targets. Major Santos coordinated her squadron to spell out words in their movement patterns, words that had no military meaning but created cognitive dissonance in the hive mind. The result was total swarm collapse. Bioships began shutting down as the fractured hive mind tore itself apart. Some vessels simply stopped moving. Others began attacking anything nearby, including other swarm ships. Within 6 hours, the unstoppable force that had threatened to devour the galaxy was in full retreat. Surviving bioships fled the system in complete disorder. Their coordination so damaged they could barely function as individual units. General Caxwell's message to Rivera was brief. The Empire accepts all terms. Welcome to independence. But Rivera's response surprised everyone. We're not done yet. Over the following months, human forces systematically cleared swarm infestations from dozens of star systems. Not to return them to the Empire, but to establish human colonies. The Terra Liberation Front had become something the galaxy had never seen before. A military organization that actually liberated worlds instead of conquering them. The methods used were uniquely human. Instead of destroying planets that had been corrupted by swarm biotechnology, human scientists found ways to reverse the damage. Worlds that had been written off as permanently dead began to bloom again under human care. Former Private Chen, now captain of the engineering corps, stood on the observation deck of a terraforming station, watching green continents emerge on a world that had been gray and lifeless just months before. How do you explain this to command? Asked his Veiltharan liaison, Dr. Veltar. We don't, Chun replied. We just do it. The transformation extended beyond military victories. Human colonies began attracting refugees from other species, beings who had lost their worlds to the swarm and found hope in human ingenuity and determination. The Terra Liberation Front became a multi-species organization united around human leadership and human values. General Rivera established a new capital on Kepler 442b, the world where it had all begun. The former mining facility had become a thriving city. Its buildings a unique fusion of human architecture and adapted swarm biotechnology. Standing in his office, looking out over the city that had grown from a desperate last stand, Rivera reflected on how much had changed. The Empire had sent 20,000 humans to die on this world. Instead, they had created a new civilization. The swarm, meanwhile, had retreated to the galaxy's outer rim. Intelligence reports suggested the hive mind was still fractured, different sections fighting each other as much as they fought external enemies. They remained dangerous, but they were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. The Empire continued to exist, but its absolute authority was broken. Dozens of species had followed the human example, declaring independence and forming their own governments. The galaxy was becoming a more diverse, more chaotic, and ultimately more human place. When Ambassador Dexfer arrived for the formal recognition ceremony, he brought a question that had been puzzling Imperial scholars for months. "How did you know?" he asked Rivera. "How did you know that chaos could defeat order?" Rivera smiled, thinking of all the soldiers who had died and lived and fought to make this moment possible. "We didn't know. We just refused to give up." As the ceremony concluded and the Terra Liberation Front was formally recognized as a sovereign power, Rivera walked through the city streets. Children played in parks that had been carved from former battlefields. Former soldiers worked alongside former enemies to build something new. The Empire had sent them to die, but humans had done something much more dangerous. They had survived, adapted, and thrived. They had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from following rules, but from refusing to accept limitations. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere among the stars, other species were learning that when you push humans too far, they don't break. They evolve.